Episode 6, Road's End, the season finale. In the future, we see a man walking on the road. Currently, Dave is standing over a cliff. He's at a vantage point where he can see the cabin surrounded by a few hundred deadheads. Dave says to Miles and his men, "We wait here until we hear that absolutely beautiful sound of death." The camera goes from the top of the cliff where Dave and his men are standing, and all in one shot it goes all the way down to the cabin surrounded by deadheads as we see them fill the yard. Lincoln and the others are in the cabin, surrounded by deadheads. Tom says there's got to be a way out of here, and Lincoln says, "Oh yeah? How? Turn into one of them and walk through them? There's no option here." Luke says, "You know, you're not that far away from a solution, Lincoln, my man." And Lincoln asks him what he means. Luke says, "Okay, well, usually when me and the guys are caught up in a tight space with no escape like this, and hear me out on this, we cover ourselves with the insides of those things." Lincoln laughs and says, "You're joking, right?" Luke says, "Well, we could also just sit here and wait to die and let Dave get what he wants." And there's some awkward silence, and Lincoln decides to go with Luke's idea, and they decide to open the door, and Lincoln tells Tom, "Okay, I want you to hold the door half open, and once I kill one and bring one in here, you close the door on the others that try to get in here." "Okay, I need a group effort here." Tom is at the door, and Lincoln says, "All right, 3, 2, 1. And Tom opens the door, and Lincoln takes his machete and kills the first one that comes at him. He quickly drags this reanimated corpse into the cabin, and Tom tries to close the door, but he's struggling. So Sydney, Emma, and Luke, and one of Luke's guys all push against the door with enough effort. They struggle a bit, but they manage to close the door. They all look at the dead corpse, and Luke says, "All right, who wants to open this guy up?" Tom says, "All right then, you bunch of babies. I'll do it." Lincoln says, "Oh, shut up, man. It smells disgusting. You can't say it doesn't." And Tom says, "All right, Lincoln, give me your machete." And Lincoln hands it over, and Tom says, "Okay, here goes nothing." And he starts slicing it open. Then when he cuts it enough, Luke says, "All right, everyone, make sure to cover yourself enough so they can't smell you." And Sydney asks, "How do you know when you have enough on you?" Luke says, "When you smell more like them than you." Lincoln says, "Yeah, but not being able to shower in the apocalypse, we already all smell pretty bad." And Luke says, "All right, you've got a point, but let's just hurry up and do this." Lincoln, Tom, Sydney, Emma, Luke, and his men all cover themselves in the inside of the dead, and they approach the cabin door, and Tom opens it, and they let the deadheads flood in, and they try to walk through the hundreds of deadheads. Miles is standing over the cliff with the others, and he radios in the rest of Dave's men. that are back at their camp and tells them to meet them 15 miles south of the camp. You'll see a cabin nearby, you can't miss it. Dave wants us to experience the fall of the one and only Lincoln himself. And the guy on the walkie-talkie says, "Really? You finally got Lincoln?" And Dave takes the walkie-talkie from Miles' hands and says to his men, "Listen, stop asking questions and just get over here before you miss it. Those deadheads will have their dinner eventually." Lincoln, Tom, Sydney, Emma, Luke, and his men are walking around the deadheads, and they're trying to go slow, not to draw attention, and they can see that they're almost through the dead. Lincoln looks back at his people and nods at them in order to give them the sign that they're almost through. Dave, Miles, and his men are still at the cliff, and then the rest of Dave's people pull up in a big truck, and Miles says, "You guys made it just in time." And Dave looks happy that his people are there. But then he notices Lincoln and the others walking through the dead, and he looks very angry. Lincoln and the others successfully make it through and head off into the woods, and Lincoln says, "Where is he?" Tom says, "He couldn't have gotten far." They go up the hill. Then out of nowhere, Dave, Miles, and the other men surround them from every direction. Lincoln and the others are trapped, and Miles tells them to put their weapons down. Lincoln notices they are terribly outnumbered, so they drop them. Dave looks at Lincoln from a distance, and they both stare each other down. And Dave tells him, "This is the road's end for you," he says. "Lincoln, I gotta give it to you. You are a hard man to kill." Lincoln is looking at Dave from a distance with nothing but anger. Dave says, "You all die now." "Lincoln, do you have any final words?" Lincoln turns around and looks at his people, and he looks mad, but he looks defeated, and he says, "I hope you die a slow, painful death, Dave, because if it ain't me, it'll be someone else." And Dave looks at his men, and he says, "Kill them." Dave's men charge at Lincoln and the others with 2 swords each, and Lincoln and the others know it's over for them, and at the last possible moment, a bunch of Dave's men get gunned down. Several of Dave's men have been shot and killed, and Lincoln and the others look confused. Wesley and a bunch of his men run in and start shooting Dave's men with machine guns. Lincoln and the others see this, and they pick their weapons up and help. Meanwhile, Dave's men are just being shot to hell. Arms flying off, blood is everywhere, and a lot of Dave's men fall. Dave knows he's screwed. He starts running away with Miles and 2 of the other guys, but Tom sees him trying to get away, and he runs after them. Tom is running after Dave. Miles and his 2 men are running with Dave, and then all of a sudden, Dave looks next to him. Miles gets a bullet through his chest. He falls in front of him, and the other 2 guys get shot in the head. Dave looks surprised, and he turns around to see Tom from a distance pointing a gun at him. Tom looks at Dave and says, "For Billy, you prick." And Tom pulls the trigger. But now, there's no ammunition left in the gun. Dave takes this opportunity to run from Tom. Tom is so frustrated by that, and you can see it in his face, but he runs after Dave. Dave runs through the woods and he runs out into the road, and he runs through a very old covered bridge. Once he gets to the other side, Dave hears screams, and we see Tom on the opposite side of the bridge telling him, "That's your people, and there's nothing you can do to save them." Tom and Dave look at each other from each side of the bridge. Dave takes his sword out and he looks at Tom, and we see Tom and he's having all these flashes of Billy hanging up the tree, and Tom starts screaming as he just runs at Dave. Dave tries to take a swipe at Tom. Tom ducks and kicks Dave in the knee. Dave starts to fall down, but then Dave tackles Tom to the ground, and they both struggle for a second, and then Dave starts punching Tom in the face over and over again. Tom gets the upper hand by headbutting Dave when he gets the chance, and then Tom and Dave stand back up, and Dave runs at Tom and picks him up and slams him on the ground. But unfortunately, the bridge is so old that Tom and Dave go through the bottom of this bridge and into the water. Tom is in the water and he's still having these flashes of Billy hanging up the tree. Lincoln, Sydney, Emma, Luke, and Wesley and his men are looking for Tom, and they follow the tracks all in the woods, and then Sydney says the tracks lead right onto the road, and as they step out into the road, they notice the covered bridge. They notice the blood on the wood floor on the bridge, and Lincoln sees this big hole in the bridge, and Lincoln says, "All right, guys, be careful." Then Wesley says, "Your friend is probably dead, man." Lincoln looks at him and tells him, "He is one of the closest things I have to a brother. I'm gonna find him." He looks at his people and says, "If you all want to go to this community and walk away from this, that's fine. But I'm gonna find Tom." And Sydney says, "Me and Emma go if you go." Lincoln smiles, and Luke looks at Wesley, and Wesley agrees to help them find Tom. Two hours later, they all are walking the river, and they all are trying to find Tom, and then all of a sudden they see him wash up the river. Lincoln and Sydney run up to Tom, and Lincoln asks him if he's okay. Tom says, "Where is he? Where is?" And Lincoln says, "You didn't kill Dave?" And Tom says, "No, but I'm going to." And Lincoln stops him and says, "Look at you. Do you really think you're in the right set of mind to take him on right now?" Tom says, "I already took him on." And Lincoln says, "Yeah, and look where that got you." Lincoln turns to his people and he says, "Look at all of us. We're all exhausted, and Dave is one man out there, and he's got nothing else left, but why should we have to risk our lives when we've already lost so much? And yeah, maybe I'm selfish by saying this, but I don't want to lose anyone else. We've already lost enough." And he looks at Wesley and he says, "The amount of people you lost? Do you want to have that happen again?" Wesley says, "No." Lincoln says, "We have won this war, and with all of us together in one place, Dave won't stand a chance." The decision has been made, and we now have Lincoln, Tom, Sydney, Emma, Luke, Wesley, and his fighters are going back to Wesley's community, the suburban estates. We see them all together walking in a group to the community, as we see some time lapses. But after a long trip, they make it. The group all have smiles on their faces, and as they enter the walls of the suburban estates, they walk into seeing kids playing, and one of the kids driving around on his bike, and Lincoln and the others look blown away. Our characters have big smiles on their faces, and then Lincoln hears, "Daddy?" He turns his head to see his wife and kids. Lincoln runs to his wife and kids, and we see Lincoln have so many emotions on his face, and he hugs his family. As we see this family reunion, we zoom out on the community and their new home. We see a man walking in the dark. Then he stops. It's Chris. He's standing outside of the community walls, and he looks like he's ready to try something.